Welcome to Sex, Love and Science with Laurie Muratori, clinical psychosexual therapist and relationship expert. This podcast explores sexuality, relationships, and the many facets in between, aiming to normalize sexual conversations, issues that we all face. Let's take the taboo out of sexuality and open up the conversations for a better sexual existence. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging.
Welcome back to Sex, Love and Science. I've got a special guest today, all the way from the UK, from Devon, and I've got Anabel Reddaway here today. Today we're actually going to talk about BDSM, which is one of my favorite topics, and I have not done it yet. So thank you for joining me, Annabel.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm really excited.
Yeah, this is awesome. Annabel's written a paper actually about sexual satisfaction and how BDSM actually confirms sexual satisfaction, which I actually found fascinating and not surprising as you know, as a clinician. But I kind of want to just deep dive into it today and pick your brain if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
You are a relationship. Is it like, tell me a little bit about your coaching and what you do.
I'm a relationship and communication coach, and I've just got a real interest in sexual communication. So that's my sort of niche area, as you will. That's the one that lists me on Google. But it is really to do with this whole idea of trying to make the world talk more openly around sex, because there's so much like stigma. I don't know if it's the same in Australia, but in the UK, like nobody talks about it. And I'm the one like throwing social hand grenades left, right and center, like, come on, let's talk about this sort of thing. So I work specifically with those in relationships and individuals that are looking to sort of overcome maybe taboo or shame around sex, sexuality, or, you know, communication issues in their relationships.
Yeah, fantastic. Those are some of my biggest passions as well. I think you're right that people don't talk about sex. And even more surprisingly, if you are in a partnership or relationship, you still don't talk about sex.
This is right, yeah.
Which is why we have jobs.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So I was actually reading your paper, and one thing that kind of like really stood out to me that I think on the topic while we're just diving in is that I think it said that 2/3 of people know what their partner likes. Is that true?
Yeah, so it was saying that even those in long-term relationships, I think it's something like 2/3 of people don't know what their partners find sexually satisfying. So people just aren't having the conversations around sex in order to understand what their partners like and dislike.
That's staggering.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a larger percentage of people. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, and you know, why do you think that is?
So when I was doing the research, and I think partly personal experience as well from previous relationships, is it can be a communication area, not an error, like a communication or miscommunication, or how our communication is met. And then there's also this other side of societal stigma and societal expectations and gendered norms and things like that suppress being able to communicate what we find sexually satisfying, our wants, needs, desires, and boundaries. So when you're looking at like the first one, which is communication, and you can look at whether the individual is feeling psychologically safe enough to express their wants, needs, desires, boundaries, as well as like sexual confidence, communication confidence, what their past experiences might have been. You've then got the messiness of like, how is my partner going to receive this information? So you're putting yourself out there in saying these things. And the research was saying, you know, you've got to face up against fear of rejection, fear of ostracism, especially for those with sexual preferences that may be outside of the normal standard deviation. You know, they fear social ostracism. There's lots of these fears that come up, vulnerability, like all of these things that are present in communicating about everyday things. They're almost like really compressed when you're then looking at talking about things that are quite vulnerable and quite taboo to talk about anyway. So that's on the one side of it. You know, how is my partner going to receive this? Am I confident enough to put this out there, especially if it's something like a BDSM preference, which, you know, because we don't talk about it, is my partner, you know, how is my partner going to react? And then on the other side, we have these traditional sexual scripts, which I spoke about in my research, which are quite gendered norms around sexuality. So things like women are the passive gatekeepers of sex. We are sexually desired, but aren't allowed to have desires. So those sort of unconscious scripts feed into our communication patterns. Or for men, they're expected to be sexually assertive and quite stoic. So, you know, to talk about something, maybe it could be like male masochism or submission. That kind of goes against gendered norms, and I put that in inverted commas, you know, around sexuality, and makes these conversations even more difficult for people to be having.
Yeah, well, I think that's a pretty legit answer. And quite comprehensive. And I guess, yeah, when we're looking at binary gendered, absolutely, and I wholeheartedly agree. You know, I'm kind of curious though, like if we were looking at those expectations and those social, you know, or the societal norms and you know, the scripts. Do you think that those scripts still kind of trickle into the BDSM world? For example, you know, if women are the gatekeepers, are women supposed to, I'm putting quotes here, guys, for everybody listening, you know, they're more likely to be submissive, or, you know, those high powered, which was just something, a cliche, but, you know, you always hear it, especially in pop culture, and those high powered CEO men sometimes want to be dominated so that they don't have to have control. You know, do you think do these expectations trickle into the world?
I think yes. No, I think it's really interesting what you said there about the high-powered sort of dominant men giving up control. I think certainly that is something that is seen more in the scene, but it's not expected in everyday culture. So in that respect, the power dynamic is being flipped. So it is going against the traditional sexual scripts that are written for inverted commas men. So I think the difference there is around the way the kink community navigate those traditional sexual scripts, because actually what my research found is that this population is actively rejecting but first they're becoming aware of the scripts that are written for them, and then they're actively rejecting them and rewriting those scripts for something that fits their relationship dynamics better. So the things that they are wanting, desiring, they're able to, through communication, have those conversations with people in order to have more sexually satisfying experiences. And I think that's what's not happening potentially in heteronormative relationships, if you will, is that people are more likely to abide by the unconscious sexual scripts rather than the BDSM community that are aware of it and they're actively rewriting it. Do you see the transfer over of women as submissive? I think the difference is in the community, women are actively consenting and asking to be submissive if that is what they enjoy. So it's in line with their sexual satisfaction, whereas it may not be the case in heteronormative. It may just be an assumption that the woman is to be the submissive one and the man to be the dominant one. And then you sort of continually and blindly adhere to these scripts. And maybe the woman in the heteronormative relationship may want to be a dominant one, but then how do you communicate that? The man may want to be the submissive one. And again, this is very binary. I'm talking, the thing that really interests me is, like, as we become a more gender fluid nation, how are these scripts going to change and play out over time? Like, that's something I didn't get a chance to look at in my research, but it was something that I would love to explore more in the future as our society starts to change. and we become more gender fluid as a nation, potentially, we see that more in the kink scene, that most, especially in my research, like a lot of people didn't. I gave a free form where they could fill out their own sexuality and orientation and gender. So they were able, and there wasn't any binaries in there. You know, there was lots of flexibility on many of those things and how people identified themselves.
So, all right. So in a nutshell, this is what I'm hearing is basically, I guess the kink community, the BDSM community, it's irrespective of gender, because we're actually throwing that out the window. It's just a human, and no matter what you like, it's really two people just navigating what they like and having the skills and the confidence and the to be able to identify, this is what I like and this is what I want out of a sexual scenario, out of a relationship, and talking about it. That's kind of what I'm gathering.
Yeah, you summarize that really well. I tend to go off on lots of different tangents, so I'm glad you're reeling me back in. Thank you. That is it. That is exactly it. They're able to have those conversations where they can just be really direct in their communication, because as well as like I said, those individual factors, being part of a community, which was something that was kind of like a secondary finding in my research, and what I looked at through my discussion was that people that were participating in BDSM belong to a community where open dialogue around sex was really welcome. So as I said earlier, where we're fearing vulnerability, we're fearing rejection, we're fearing all these different things before we're able to speak up, those sorts of things aren't there in the BDSM community. So people feel much more safe to be able to talk about their preferences in the environment that they're in.
Yeah. No, you're making a really good point too, because I mean, at the end of the day, communities make people feel safer and connected, right? So, I mean, if you're bringing that to the sexual table, you're already kind of having a little bit more confidence under your belt before you even start. Tell me more about, I guess, your research with, BDSM communities and how people find one another, or, you know, I guess for any listener who, you know, might not have that community or know that there's a community out there.
Yeah, so most of my recruitment was done on the online platform FetLife, which is a community platform dedicated to BDSM practitioners or those that are interested in BDSM. And what that platform, the thing that really interested me was before I could post and this is a reflection of the BDSM community in itself, in that it's quite a highly educated community. And in order for me to post about my research on their platform, which some people may look at and be like, oh my goodness, you know, like quite stigmatize that platform, I had to show them the outline of my research and basically send them my whole ethical approval before they would allow me to post on their platform for recruitment. Yeah, wow. So I think the fact that they take that so seriously shows that they're a community that's serious about what they do, and they want to put the frameworks in place to support their members, which is brilliant. So I recruited through there. So there is an implicit assumption with my sample that those that participated in my study were already part of a community. You mentioned FetLife, which is, a fantastic resource. I do a lot of clients to that website. Yeah. So going on there's lots of different groups and things that you can join around pretty much any sort of fetish or kink. And you'll be able to find like peer support. So it was quite clear with that sense of community, there are certain things that are present again that allow people to have the communication that they want to have, because people are really open on the platform. There's a safe, non-judgmental space for people to be able to talk to others. There's peer facilitated educational frameworks. So you have events and meetings that people can put up if they're interested in learning more, say about rope tying or power dynamics. You know, there are like actual events you can go to. They also have social events called munches. I don't know if it's the same over in Australia, but they have in the UK, they have like these munches where people just go and they're able to turn up and talk about anything that they want to be talking about. They also have like accountability groups as well. So if things sometimes maybe, I was only informed of this the other day, actually, that they have on FetLife something called like incident reports. So if someone plays out a scene that perhaps hasn't gone quite as planned, they can go and then find advice and support on how to navigate and learn from that experience, which again seems to be absent in other areas. And so there's so much that people can learn from these. And I think the really important thing that came out of my research was there was one particular study done by Rittenhauer in 2023, and they said that people that self-learn BDSM don't have the same communication skills as those that learn from being part of a community, and actually they're more at risk of creating an environment where there is like sexual violence or coercion. So it's actually that community element is really important in order to learn in the right way. So those that are learning from 50 Shades of Grey or porn or pop culture about BDSM, it's those things that are creating dangerous practices and things that are becoming more normalized that perhaps shouldn't be, such as asphyxiation. And people are, that in a world of itself, when not done properly, can have fatalities involved in it. So it's really important to learn how to do it from a community in a way that's sensible and safe.
100%. I couldn't agree more. I think that's a really important aspect. And I like what you're saying is, being part of a community actually actively helps somebody have those communication skills. I mean, if I was thinking of like an analogy, I'd be thinking about like trying to learn a new language and all on my own, sitting in my room and trying to talk to myself, and not getting the skills to actually ever utilize conversing in a different language.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes so much sense, doesn't it? And you can't, it's really difficult to self-learn these things, and especially with something like BDSM that does hold, you have to, part of the communication frameworks that this community have designed themselves through communication, they have like 5 or 6 different acronyms for frameworks. And consent comes into all of them, being risk aware. The idea is they want to enhance these BDSM experiences, but minimize non-consensual harm or injury in a way that works for everybody. So these things are actually necessary in order for people to stay safe and risk aware, which are 2 things that come up in the communication frameworks that I looked at when I was doing my literature review.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do you want to run through some of those acronyms? Because I sometimes they're, for anybody listening might not know, I guess RAC would be probably the number one, the top of my head that comes to mind.
Yeah, so the first one was SSC, which was safe, sane and consensual. That developed into RAC, which was risk aware, consensual, kink, because they then there was the understanding that changing from safety to being risk aware, because there are inherent, physical things that happen that may be unsafe. But so it's coming from being risk aware rather than being completely safe. So there's a slight change there. And then there was a more recent one that I should have written down. I mentioned in my research. It's called the 4 C's framework. And I'm going to try and remember the 4, but it was care, consent, communication, and connection, I believe, but don't quote me on that. So it's called the 4 C's framework. And that's a more recent one that came out a few years ago with some research around that. And that one is, again, it's got consent in there, but it highlights the importance of communication and care in the way that we are having these conversations around what we're going to be participating in. And I think it's really important actually to talk about the fact that people that are participating in a scene, and it's something else that I covered in my research as well, is like the negotiation is not just before. So it's like before, during, after, and in that you have things like safe words that give agency and power, say, to like submissives, which again may not be present at other times. And that's where that obligation and coercion can sometimes come in, where you feel that you're not able to say, actually, no, I'm not comfortable right now. Can you stop? Whereas there's actually like a complete framework in the BDSM community where you could use like a traffic light system to negotiate actually during these intimate moments about what you're enjoying, not enjoying, stop that, continue that. I can't think of any periods myself where I've had sex and I've sort of gone, oh, hang on a minute, green or amber, or, you know, and I've spoken to friends and I'm like, do you have like safe words in your sexual encounters? And they look at me like I'm crazy. But these sorts of things are completely normal for the BDSM community. And then afterwards, they'll have what they call aftercare. So when a scene has taken place, between like a dominant and a submissive, the dominant is there to provide the care after that person needs to, you know, restore connection or care, or it may just be that they're applying massage oil to an area that's been subjected to impact, things like that. So it's not like, oh, we've finished the act now, we'll stop. You know, there's more afterwards, and then there's before and during, and it's just negotiated the whole way through. And I think that's a really important point to mention about the community as well, and something that they're doing really, really well.
Yeah, well, 100%. I mean, if you're negotiating at each step of the way and you're engaging in something that you like and not engaging in something you don't like, I mean, of course, that's going to increase your sexual satisfaction. Yeah, and I think you make a good point too, is if people are talking about it or writing about it online and you're actively, you know, putting out there what you like or what you're thinking about or fantasizing about or a scene, like you're putting it out there. You're not just going blind into a scenario, trying to all of a sudden fumble and figure it out, which I guess potentially people not in the BDSM kink world do, is you just 2 people, 3 people, however many people go into a bedroom and try to figure something out without talking about it. And everybody expects the other to be a mind reader. Like, this is the thing that like really just floors me is, you know, we expect somebody just to like read our mind. And, you know, personally, I can say I could probably count on one hand the amount of intuitive lovers that I've ever had. It's been very far between. And it's quite an advanced skill to just know what somebody wants without talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how many inherent assumptions are being made, and how many of those assumptions are coming from these traditional scripts that are fed to us through society or through, you know, pornography or different mediums of popular culture, where it's like, oh, women definitely like this, or men definitely like this, or they like this, and they, you know, and then you sort of act out those things. And it worries me that like younger generations are becoming more, that they've got these things that are more accessible to them online from really, really young ages. And, you know, if you're acting out these things, what impact is that going to have? Like, we need to be teaching younger people more about how we communicate around these things and not shying away from that subject matter, right? Because assumptions can create so many issues in relationships, right? They're just
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, you know, a lot of I guess relationship issues in the sexual world kind of like keep going back to those assumptions, but not even just relationship assumptions. But yeah, back to what you're saying is, you know, what society and what we've grown up believing, and a lot of that is subconscious to a degree. You know, I'd be curious. I don't know if you did any research, though. Is I guess what, you know, I guess is there a way that people can find what they like in the BDSM world, like, you know, paths, or do you think that people just wake up and go, this is something I want to try? Like, is it gradual? I'm just kind of, you know,
I'm not sure. I mean, I read a couple of papers whilst I was doing my research that suggested that people first become aware of BDSM preferences like quite early on in their lives. I think I don't want to give the age, but it was certainly like adolescence time. Like, you become aware of it quite early on, and then as you're sort of going through puberty, I guess, and I think teenagers may actually talk about sex better than adults. As I remember being a teenager myself, that's not based on any research whatsoever, but that could also just be my own thing about being really open. but yeah, I that's all I sort of came across in my research, was that it's quite an early realization for most people when it comes to things like that. In regards to pathways, I think it's something like, well, the statistic changes, and again, I think who's actually reporting honestly in the research, but some research was saying like 8% of the population, and some people were saying like much higher percentages of people are engaging in BDSM, but it's like, where are you getting your sample from? So there's lots of critical issues around that too.
Yeah.
But I think for me, if you just talk openly to a few people, I'm sure you might find someone that participates in BDSM, and then you got to sort of go from there. Like, where are they getting their information from? And then again, you're into the community aspect then, or like you said, like just go and have a look on FetLife, or it's a really accepting and welcoming community, and you could put a post on there and people would like scoop you up like a nurturing parent. Let me teach you all I know.
No, I've had several clients have good experiences. And look, I mean, putting it all in context, I mean, I've had plenty of people who've also had not so great experiences, but I think no matter what community or no matter what kind of online forum that you enter, you're going to have all types of people, irrespective of, we're all here because we all like pretty much the same thing, same topic.
Yeah.
So,
which kind of takes the shame element away, right? Mm-hmm. So you're sort of entering into a community where your preferences are put in perspective. So for those that may have grown up their whole life thinking, is what I'm feeling right or wrong or shameful? Like, they're suddenly looking at these things and going, oh, okay, I'm normal. Mm-hmm. So I think that's quite profound in itself, and just how much that can shift a mindset. I know when I talk to people, because I'm so open, one of the things I hear quite a lot from, because I'm the kind of person that will have these conversations over dinner. People generally say to me like, oh my goodness, this is so refreshing to be able to have this conversation with you, because nobody talks about this stuff. And I think that's the vision for me, is just like, when we can talk more openly about these things, we can then learn more about what we find sexually satisfying. And in that, it gives us more agency to make choice about how we want to navigate our own sexuality.
100%.
So that's the real important thing there, right? That we're not just blindly going along with things that we don't find enjoyable, because, that's been a personal experience of mine. And I didn't know any different. So it was only going through like therapy and coaching that I realized, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm obliging to things that I don't actually want to be doing. And in that, inherently, the consent is kind of taken away, because you're just doing things that you don't want to do, because we're told that that's kind of what we should be doing. And again, that's an assumption, and that's damaging to people's relational and sexual well-being.
Oh, it really is. And I think though, I think you make a good point of, having that agency. I think when we take away that shame, right, it kind of boosts that agency to like whatever it is that we like. And I think that's really important. Just from my clinical experience and practice, I find that if I try to bring up BDSM or kink with a lot of people, the first response is, oh no, I'm not into whips and chains. Like, everybody thinks it has to do with whips and chains. And, it's really interesting that for something, for such a huge umbrella, that majority of the population that I speak to thinks it's just whips and chains.
Yeah. And where are they learning that information? Like, that's not coming, that's coming from what they're seeing on TV, or what they're seeing, like the S&M part of it, right? Nobody's looking at the whole meditative state that like perhaps impact can put someone into. Like, it's not from the people that I was speaking to and liaising with, because a lot of people after my research got in touch with me, and we had some really good conversations about various different things. And a lot of people were talking about the fact that it's not anything to do with what they're doing to each other. It's to do with how that makes them feel. So it was like peace and serenity and like an altered state of consciousness, which again came up in the research. Like that whole idea of giving up control and surrendering to another person, being completely bound in bondage, unable to move. Like that was filling these people with this sense of like calm is one of the things that came up so much when, you know, I was talking to people, is like how calm they feel in those situations of being submissive. And for those that were in like a dominant or a top position, and again, there's so many other dynamics within this, you know, like dominant submission is just like two of many multiple things. But people like dominants that I was speaking to were saying about how they get into this mindset of like peak performance and focus. And in that as well, they have like these experiences that are fully embodied that just feel really good. Like, so it's not about whether you're having whips and chains or, you know, and there's so much that people miss out on the fact there's this whole sensual element to kink too. That's really like about sensory experience and like engaging with the body with like feathers or different sensations and just lots of different things. You could bring in like elements of tantra into kink. There's like lots of different intersections. It's definitely not just whips and chains.
Absolutely. And I think what you said was, you know, something that I speak pretty much every day in consultations is I like what you said about it being freeing, right? Like it's about how somebody's feeling. So, you know, the maybe mainstream mentality of the whips and chains part is still that performative mode. And right, it's still making sex or sexuality or kink still performative. And that's, you know, we know that, well, whether we're partaking in BDSM or kink or even not that if the event is performative, it's detracting from the satisfaction and from the feeling. So yeah, why mainstream is still kind of showing that, I don't know. You know, although I'm not going to go off, I'll probably try not to go off on a tangent, but I did think the movie Baby Girl.
I haven't seen that one.
Oh, okay. I won't even go there. But yeah, kind of back to just like mainstream, depictions of what BDSM is. I mean, I've never actually read 50 Shades of Grey. I've never actually watched the movie, but I have so many people who reference it. And I kind of understand the premise, but I guess a lot of people are basing the whole entire world of BDSM and the umbrella on that.
Yeah.
You know, do you think that was helpful or a hindrance?
So two things here with 50 Shades of Grey, and I did read them all and I loved them.
Yeah.
But now looking back with educated eyes, the things that I can very, very clearly see is there was coercion in that relationship. It was a romanticized image of a controlling relationship. It did not depict any of what you would see in communication frameworks of the BDSM in a film. Like, it was completely eroticized to support these unconscious traditional scripts of, you know, women not having agency in their sexual experiences being the one. And then on the other hand, what also fascinated me was how popular it was, which just goes to show that, and especially with women, right? So there's definitely, for me, it opened my eyes to like, females want to be having good sex too, and it may not be traditionally, like, I put in air quotes, like vanilla sex. Like there's things that they're wanting to explore. That's why they're so interested. So there was so much interest in it, and the popularity of that book, I think, was an eye opener.
Yeah.
To this idea of females having sexual desire because again, we have this script around, and I read a great book by Neva Piran and she did a 5-year study on the embodiment of women and girls. And I was so angry when I finished reading it. But one of the points in there that came out of her research was this theme around women as desired, but desireless. So we're objectified as sexual beings, but we're not allowed to have our own sexual agency and desire. I think 50 Shades of Grey and the popularity among women just goes to show that women do have sexual desire. And I think, we've come on, it's been 12 years since that book came out. I think it's like 2013 or something it came out. And I think that is becoming more aware in the mainstream now, but it was a big eye opener. But certainly that relationship was, the way that was depicted was not in line and quite damaging to people learning BDSM from that way of doing it. And there's been whole papers published on it. Like I looked at some of them. I think Meg Barker did one on looking at how BDSM was portrayed in that film, and it's not good. So don't learn your BDSM from 50 Shades of Grey.
There we go. Another takeaway. But I mean, what I did take away on a positive from what you said is, though, if you can have agency, and you exercise your agency, it doesn't matter if you want to be submissive or you want to have a relationship in whatever form that it is, because you have the agency to do so, which is actually then eliminating any coercion or control, because it is with whatever you want as the individual, which is kind of preach as well.
And the really interesting thing that came about was when I was talking to people that identify purely as female submissives, so not switches, but they are purely submissive in the way they interact with BDSM. It seemed to me that those women had the most control, because, which flips it on its head, right? People might look at BDSM and think that it's just exacerbating the patriarchy or whatever. Whereas actually female submissives have the most control because they can safe word, because they can tell the dominant exactly what they want, and that has to be respected because their boundaries have been set out from the start, during and afterwards. They're getting exactly what they want in that moment, because that's the sort of mutual respect that happens in that scene, and they can stop it at any time, just with one word or 2 words or whatever's been prearranged and discussed. So they actually have the most agency, I would say, in those dynamics. So when you said about does that spill over from mainstream into BDSM, I don't think it does, because of that level of agency and control that the submissive has.
And that is such a fantastic point. And I think for anybody listening, hopefully that could be refreshing to hear, and potentially motivating to exercise agency or to feel more comfortable utilizing your sexual voice, especially if you would like to be submissive, because why not, if you're going to have the control and the respect, or be the dominant and still, right? I guess we're all mutually respectful. Looking at that space.
I'm really passionate about looking at the strengths of diverse communities. That came from my master's degree, because I looked at positive psychology, which is a really strengths focused way of looking at the world. So I'm really curious and respectful and passionate about diversity, and sex has just always been an interest for me. So it kind of merged all of my things into one paper. But when I was looking at the research, I was like, oh my goodness, like there's nothing here. So I read 4 papers that all suggested that, and I mean, 4 is nothing in itself, right? But there was 4 papers published suggesting that BDSM practitioners have higher levels of sexual satisfaction. I was like, the world needs to hear about this. This is really important stuff. So there was only 4 papers. And in that, there was real inconsistency. There was a couple that looked at whether BDSM role was responsible for sexual satisfaction. So one looked at whether submissive, one looked at dominant, one looked at switches, and it was all inconsistent. They had no firm research. And my brain, I was like, surely it's got to do with like communication. Why has no one looked at this? They've looked at the power of communication in heteronormative relationships, and we know that improves sexual satisfaction. So surely there's like this mediating link between BDSM practitioners and sexual satisfaction. That must be why. So when I looked at it, I was absolutely amazed at the fact that even though I had a small sample size, it was like 376 people, which is quite big, but also really small when you're doing a mediation study, which is what I did. But I was expecting, maybe directness of communication had something to do with it. But what the research found was that it's completely to do with it. So if you take that out of the equation, those that participate in BDSM don't actually have higher levels of sexual satisfaction once you take the element of communication out of the relationship between the two.
Yeah, okay.
So that was the interesting part. And then again, what I didn't talk about in my research, which I also found really fascinating, was I had 276 participants from the BDSM community and then 100 from the mainstream community. And it took 3 days to recruit my BDSM participants and 3 weeks to recruit my non-BDSM participants. So I think that in itself kind of speaks volumes about how much people don't want to be talking about sex. And it was a survey, so you can do it completely anonymously, but people just didn't want to be engaging in it. Whereas what I saw on FetLife is one person posted it and then lots of other people, they write, and I didn't know what this was at the time, they write crumbs under the post, which means like it shows then on their feed, and so everyone else can see it. So they were engaging, but they were sharing it with everyone else to take part of, and they were really affirming of it. So they were sharing to their friends and saying, hey, this is, someone looking at this research, we need to like reduce the stigma, please take part, share it on. And it just like snowballed completely across the platform, which is not something that happened outside of the BDSM community. And it was like pulling teeth trying to get those participants. And there's also this there's this line as well that I spoke about in my discussion where because some things are becoming more normalized in mainstream, or some activities like spanking, or like I said, asphyxiations, and some of them that are quite dangerous are coming in more mainstream. There could have been this challenge where people do participate in BDSM, or what would be classed as BDSM activities, but actually didn't know that that's what it was, or, people may have said they do. And then, so I didn't specifically put down activities. I asked people to self-identify whether they participated. There could have been like a bit of confusion there. There might have been really kinky people doing stuff and they just think it's normal. So there were a few little things where it opens up the world of researchers to do more research in this area to further confirm or deny my findings. Like, I'm really open to that. And one thing that I'm really interested, if I could ever find the funding to do it, is to look at whether those that communicate so well about sex in the BDSM community, whether that communication pattern transfers over to their everyday romantic relationships. So do BDSM participants communicate as well about their emotional needs, wants, desires, boundaries, as well as they communicate about sex? Because we know they communicate really well about sex, but does it then transfer over to their everyday marriages, for example, or relationships, or, whatever relationship dynamic that they have? So watch this space.
Fantastic. I love that. And I'm just, I'm going to be thinking about that one. That's a really good point. And also hilarious that, the difference between BDSM participants and who are like sticking their hand up straight away. Yeah, let's do this. This is awesome. I'll do it. And then other participants who just wanted to run a mile, which is, I think that kind of confirms your entire page.
I know. I didn't need to do all the statistical analysis. I just had to observe the
100%.
the rates of people opting in. That was it. Done. Tick, done. Submit. Didn't need to spend 6 months writing up a report, doing all the analysis on it. There we go. Done, cut and dry. Yeah.
Oh, well, Annabel, thank you so much for jumping on today. Like, this has been so informative, especially for anybody who's, who wants to know more about the BDSM space. And I think, you're bringing a really important conversation to the piece that people aren't thinking about, which I absolutely love. So thank you.
Oh, no, you're more than welcome, Lauren. It's been lovely just to have a chat about it and, again, just be so open about it. It's just really nice.